reached the Apache border camp in thin, uneven strips, the kind that appeared after a long day of dust, smoke, and heat. The ground held footprints, old ashes, and broken bits of trade. Horsehair rope, cracked pottery, worn-out saddle straps. Men bartered over things laid out on blankets, and the noise rose and fell in ordinary waves until someone laughed too loud or someone shoved another man aside. Nothing here felt settled. In the center of the camp, Cole Warren stood tied to a rough wooden post with his wrists pulled behind him. The rope cut into his skin, and the tension in his shoulders forced him to shift every few minutes just to keep his hands from going numb. Sweat mixed with dirt on his face, and dried blood marked the left side of his jaw where one of the renegades hit him earlier. He kept his breathing even, partly to handle the pain, and partly because any sign of panic would make him look weak to men who were looking for reasons to break him further. Cole's thoughts moved slowly and sharply, the way a man thinks when he has run out of good choices. He had been driving cattle alone that morning, planning to reach a small grazing bend before sunset. His purpose was simple: deliver the herd, collect his pay, and move on before anyone asked him to stay. He had no interest in towns, no interest in forming ties. Trouble found him anyway. The renegades had rushed him near the dry wash, pulled him off his horse, and taken him without giving him time to understand what they wanted. Now he stood in the middle of a camp that didn't care whether he lived or not, waiting to be traded for whatever scraps the men here considered useful. He tried to stay alert, but each hour tied to the post made it harder. He had taken too many hits to the ribs during the fight, and every breath came with a small, sharp ache. He scanned the crowd, judging distance, direction, and attitude. None of it gave him a path out. A short distance away, an Apache woman stood between two battered shelters, half in the light and half in the shade of a crooked tree. She kept one arm close to her chest, hiding bruises under her torn deerskin top. Her skirt carried dried mud, dust, and ripped edges from running through brush for several days. Her hair hung long and uneven across her shoulders, strands loose from wind and exhaustion. Her name was Asha. She was 24. She had arrived in the camp only hours before Cole, moving with the kind of caution that came from being hunted. Another band had blamed her for a raid she did not commit, and she had fled with almost nothing. She needed shelter, protection, and a place to disappear. Her mission, for the moment, was survival. Nothing more. She tried to avoid the crowd, but her eyes kept returning to the man tied to the post. She watched the way he stood, silent, aware of every person around him, taking no unnecessary risks. She saw how he restricted his breathing to keep his ribs steady. She noticed his attempts to shift his weight without drawing attention. The smallest details told her he wasn't a reckless man. He was disciplined, cautious, and holding himself together long after many others would have broken. Asha felt something she hadn't felt in days. A small push inside her chest that said this man wasn't like the ones who had chased her through the canyon. She didn't trust easily, and she didn't trust now. Not fully, but he didn't look at anyone with cruelty or mockery. That mattered. When the renegade trader walked toward Cole and announced that bidding would begin, Asha watched closely. Men circled with amused expressions. The first offer came from a tall man holding a worn saddle blanket. The second came from someone waving a chipped metal bowl. Each offer was meant as a joke. They didn't see a person tied to the post. They saw a chance to laugh. Cole's jaw tightened. He didn't look up. He let the ridicule pass him by. He couldn't fight, couldn't run, couldn't talk his way out, so he focused on breathing through the pain and keeping his mind sharp. Asha's pulse changed. A tight pressure built in her chest. She had been forced into decisions her whole life, but this one came from herself. She stepped away from the shade and moved toward the center of the camp. The air shifted as she entered open ground. Conversations quieted. Men turned their heads. She reached into the small woven pouch hidden beneath her skirt. Inside were the last pieces of her past life. A string of beads she had owned since she was small, a small bone-handled knife, and the beaded armband her mother had given her before she died. Losing these items meant cutting off the last pieces of home she carried. But keeping them wouldn't save her. Keeping them wouldn't give her protection. Keeping them wouldn't give her someone she could trust. She stepped closer to the renegade trader. The entire camp watched her. "Free him," she said, her voice steady but raw from days without rest. "He goes with me." A long silence followed. It wasn't respect. It was surprise. The trader narrowed his eyes, gauging whether this woman had anything worth taking. When he saw the armband, carefully woven, clearly important, he nodded. He didn't argue. He didn't question her choice. He reached for Cole. Two men cut the rope from a post. Cole's wrists dropped forward, blood returning to his hands with a sharp sting. The renegades shoved him, but Asha stepped in front of them and blocked the push with her body. She didn't touch Cole, but her stance made it clear she wouldn't allow more violence. Cole looked at her for the second time that day. Confusion tightened in his shoulders. He didn't know what she wanted, why she would trade anything for a stranger, or whether this new situation was better or worse than the last. Asha didn't give him time to question. "Come," she said quietly. He hesitated for a brief moment, long enough for fear and instinct to pull in two opposite directions. Running made no sense. Staying in the camp made even less. She was the only person here who had shown him any kind of will to protect. He decided to follow her. Asha led him out of the camp and into the trees. She had built a small hide-covered shelter earlier that day, barely large enough for two people to sit. They stepped inside. The air was cold and still. Asha crouched down and lit a small fire with shaking hands. She didn't hide her fatigue anymore. Her arms trembled. Her breaths were tight. Cole lowered himself opposite her. His ribs throbbed. His wrists burned. He kept his voice steady. "You didn't have to do that," he said. Asha didn't look at him. She fed a dry branch into the small fire. "I needed someone," she answered plainly. "You were alone too." Cole absorbed her words slowly. She wasn't asking for help. She wasn't demanding anything. She was explaining her decision, directly and without apology. The firelight showed the strain on her face. It also showed fear mixed with something quieter, hope for safety, or at least a chance at it. When she finally looked at him, her voice came out softer. "You stay with me now," she said. "You will be my husband." Cole didn't move or speak right away. He processed every angle: danger, risk, uncertainty, survival. He looked at her bruises, her empty pouch, her exhaustion, the steadiness she was forcing herself to maintain. Her words weren't a command. They were a request from someone who had run out of choices. He didn't answer yet, but he didn't get up to leave. That alone meant something. Asha lowered her eyes to the fire. The tension in her shoulders eased by a fraction. In the silence that followed, each of them tried to understand the other, why they were here, what they needed, and whether trusting a stranger made more sense than trusting anyone else they had met in months. Outside, the camp noise faded under the growing cold. Inside, a wounded cowboy and a hunted Apache woman sat across from each other in a small shelter, both tired, both uncertain, both aware that their lives had just shifted in a way neither had prepared for. Their story began in that quiet space. Two people with nothing left but the decision to sit, breathe, and hope the other did not turn away. Cold morning light pushed into the shelter through a small gap in the hide roof. Cole opened his eyes to the sound of Asha moving quietly near the fire pit. She was kneeling, adding thin branches one by one, careful not to make unnecessary noise. Her movements carried the stiffness of someone who didn't sleep long or well. Cole felt a similar weight in his shoulders and ribs. The night had been a mix of shallow sleep and constant listening. He sat up slowly, feeling the soreness along his side. Asha glanced at him, her eyes alert even before her body fully woke. "You awake?" she said softly. "Yeah," he answered, rubbing his wrists where the skin was raw from the ropes the day before. Asha handed him a small piece of dried meat from her pouch. It wasn't much, but it was all she had. He accepted it with a small nod, trying not to eat it too fast. His stomach tightened from hunger, reminding him how long it had been since a real meal. Asha ate her own portion quietly, taking smaller bites than him. Cole noticed. She was rationing her food in a way that suggested she had done it many times before. He chewed slowly, partly to match her pace and partly because he didn't want to take more from her than he already had. "Camp wakes soon," Asha said. "We leave before that." Cole understood the urgency. Staying too close to the renegades meant trouble, either being taken again or being questioned by people who already traded him away. He also understood that Asha was expected to disappear just as quickly. She had cut ties with her old band, and she didn't belong to this camp either. "Where are we going?" he asked. "To where no one looks for me," she said simply. It wasn't a clear answer, but it was honest. Cole stood up, stretching his back until the stiffness eased a little. He checked the open flap of the shelter. The camp beyond the trees was just beginning to stir. A distant voice rose, then another. Somewhere metal struck metal. Horses shifted in the dust. The early noises of men preparing for another day. Asha noticed his focus. "We must go now," she said. "They see me with you questions." Cole tied his coat tighter, ignoring the pain that pulled across his ribs. "I can walk," he said. She looked at him closely, measuring his condition. He stood straight despite the injury, and though his movements were careful, he wasn't collapsing. She nodded once. Outside the shelter, the cold air hit instantly. Asha wrapped her thin deerskin around her shoulders. Cole saw how much she was shaking, not from fear but from lack of rest and warmth. He stepped ahead to ensure the path was clear. They moved through a narrow break in the trees. Asha walked slightly behind him for the first few minutes, her steps quiet and light. She checked their trail constantly, brushing aside footprints with a branch to hide signs of their passing. Cole's mind kept returning to the night before, the way she had stood in front of the renegades, the way she had offered everything she owned. He didn't understand her full reasoning yet, but he had decided not to question it until the time was right. Being alive was the reason he could ask anything at all. After they climbed a low ridge, the sounds of the camp faded. Asha slowed her pace, breathing harder. Cole noticed a bruise on her arm again, the one she forced herself not to show pain for. "You hurt anywhere else?" he asked. She kept walking for a few seconds before answering. "No more than usual." It wasn't meant to dismiss him. It was the truth. Pain was normal for her at this point. Cole didn't push. He let the silence settle, feeling the shift in her breathing and the weight she carried without saying it. After another half-mile, they reached a small clearing with short grass and scattered rocks. Asha stopped, listening hard. Her eyes tracked the sky, the ridge behind them, and the brush to their left. "Safe here for a moment," she said. She lowered herself onto a rock and stretched her fingers to ease stiffness. Cole sat across from her. "Tell me about the men following you," he said calmly. Asha hesitated. She didn't like revisiting it. Her voice dropped. "I was blamed for a raid. I was not there. But they say women must answer." Cole had seen similar situations in border towns. Leadership masking mistakes by punishing someone weaker. He didn't need the full story yet. He could see the truth in the way she held herself. "They won't stop looking?" he asked. She shook her head. "They want someone to blame. They choose me." Cole exhaled carefully, controlling his reaction. It wasn't shock. It was frustration at how easily people discarded others. He knew the feeling. He had been tired of being used and betrayed years ago, and part of him recognized the same exhaustion in her. "We'll stay ahead of them," he said. Asha lifted her eyes. For the first time since they met, there was a visible shift there. Not hope exactly, but the first sign that she wasn't alone in the decision-making. She stood again. "We move until sun is high. Then find water. Lead the way," Cole said. As they continued, the ground sloped downward into a stretch of scattered brush. Cole stayed close, watching for riders, tracks, or trouble. Asha set a pace she could maintain, not fast but steady. She didn't waste breath on unnecessary conversation, and neither did he. Their silence wasn't cold. It was a shared understanding. Both were tired, both were hunted, both needed each other to reach the next hour. When they reached the dry wash ahead, Asha stopped suddenly. She crouched low, touching the dirt with her fingertips. She lifted a faint track, fresh, curved, made by a horse moving slowly. Her breath tightened. "Someone passed here today," she whispered. Cole knelt beside her, reading the ground. "One rider. Not fast." Asha nodded. His reading matched hers. "Could be scout," she said. "Could be stranger," Cole replied. Both possibilities held danger. Asha straightened slowly, adjusting the strap on her pouch. She looked at Cole, watching how he handled the uncertainty. Calm, alert, ready to move without panic. "You walk with me," she said quietly. "I'm here," he answered. It was the first moment that felt like a real agreement rather than survival tied together by necessity. They stepped into the dry wash, their shadows stretching long across the pale dirt. Two hunted people moving with steady caution, beginning a journey neither had planned, but both understood was now shared. The sun rose higher as they followed the narrow, dry wash westward. The ground was uneven with loose stones that shifted under their boots, forcing both of them to stay light on their steps. Asha moved ahead first, her eyes sharp, scanning brush and shallow dips in the land. Cole watched the way her shoulders tightened whenever she noticed anything unusual.